Hi everyone. So we are going to discuss government policies, interventions, and land use regulations in this lecture. Okay, so these are seemingly three separate things, but not really. They are interlinked. Okay, and the keywords and concepts for this lecture are: the first one is public goods. Okay, as opposed to market goods or private goods. Actually, market goods. So there's two types of goods and services that we learn in economy, which is public goods and market goods. So we are now talking about goods that are provided by the government. Externalities. So we have learned before how some costs and benefits escape the confines between the private transaction between two parties. Okay? In an efficient transaction, only the parties to the transaction will enjoy the benefit or pay the cost to the transaction. But in some cases, okay, outsiders or third parties will suffer the cost of the transaction, of the private transaction, or will enjoy benefits from the private transaction. So we learned that before. The third one is policy. So what is policy? How does the government use policy to influence land use? And finally, efficiency. So what is the efficient level of public goods that the government must provide for the population? Now, as introduction, the government has the ability to make policy and levy taxes on individuals and firms alike. So that those two are very significant powers that enables the government to internalize, at the end of the day, to internalize the costs and benefits, the externalities, the private, the positive externalities and the negative externalities, to internalize that, to put that back into the transaction, into the private transaction. So for positive externalities, okay, subsidize the transaction. For negative externality, tax the transaction to account for the extra costs and benefits arising from the private transaction. This power can be used to force the market to account for costs that would otherwise not be included. Like I said before, the negative externalities too. It's a way for the government to internalize the cost from the private transaction. The most compelling reason for government to use this power is when there is market failure with detrimental effects to society at large, especially negative externalities, pollution, congestion, things like that. All the major negative externalities that we see daily in cities. Now, what is the definition of market failure? Market failure can be defined as a situation in which the market on its own fails to produce an efficient allocation of resources. So that is when the government has to step in and guide the market, not just guide, influence the direction of the market or influence the pricing of the market. So we can see here an example of air pollution caused by industries. Okay, the industrial activity is a private activity, but the cost that the resultant cost to the society is larger than what they pay, than what the factories pay. They should have paid more for the for polluting the air that the society has to suffer the consequences of, right? So these are other examples, the littering, smoking, the effect on, the effect of third-hand smoke, whereby you don't smoke, but due to the fact that maybe you are around people who smoke, you will suffer the effect of second-hand smoke on your health later on in the long run. Okay? It may cause you cancer and respiratory problems. Okay? Pollution again. What is this? urban decay, healthcare needs to be, healthcare is more on, it's a public good, right? But the effect of which can be, it can have negative externality if not paid for, if not provided, because it can affect the whole population. Okay, so the next one is the role of the government. Excuse me. The role of the government in resource allocation. So, from the previous slide, we say that the markets have its own inefficiencies, okay, which may lead to failures that the government has to step in and correct the failures. So, how does the government what roles does the government have in terms of resource allocation to enable, to avoid or to lessen the effect of the market failure? So there are three roles of the government in resource allocation, according to Musgrave and Musgrave 1980. So this slide, pay attention, because at the end, I will show this again, and I will show you in the context of Malaysia what some of the examples of the Malaysian context has done in the three roles of the government. So the first one is decision making, whereby the government makes decisions about what to produce and how to produce it. So the first one is very important in terms of decision making. The second one is direct provision. Direct provision of the goods. When the government actually produces a particular good or service, it makes these resource allocation decisions directly. And another way is indirect provision or prohibition, okay? Whereby when the government subsidizes, influences the market, okay? Influences the resource allocation through subsidies or taxes. When the government subsidizes or taxes private activities, it influences the resource allocation decisions of the private sector. So indirectly, the government can influence the decision of the, the direction of the resource allocation, the amount, what else? The volume, volume amount is the same thing. The rate of resource allocation, for instance. Higher level of provision or lesser level of provision in for certain goods in the private sector. So the three areas of resource allocation by the government. The first one is public goods, in the area of public goods, as we mentioned before. Okay, the second one is for natural monopoly. Okay, resource allocation is we'll see the involvement of the government. The third one is externalities. So these three areas will see the involvement, or will see the government playing a significant role in influencing the resource allocation. So public goods, natural monopoly, and externalities. So we go to public goods. So what are the characteristics of public goods? The first one is, the first point says characteristics of local public goods are non-rivalrous. Non-rivalrous means you don't have to compete to enjoy the public goods. Non-rivalrous. Second one is non-excludable. You cannot exclude the next person from enjoying the public good. And finally, it's localized. Localized meaning the government provides for the local population. The government doesn't provide a public good and then outsiders or foreigners come in and enjoy the public goods of the country. No, the public goods are only enjoyed by the citizens of the country. When foreigners come in, or when outsiders come in, or non-citizens come in, they have to pay for the public good of the company. So when I say that, you can imagine what are some public goods some examples of public goods that we can see. The most obvious one is healthcare. Healthcare, which is in the case of Malaysia, for you guys, you pay a token amount of money to enjoy the healthcare in Malaysian hospitals. But if a foreigner comes in and gets sick, okay, then the foreigner has to pay the full amount for the healthcare. Now, it is impractical for the market to provide public goods since there is little opportunity to earn profit. Okay? This is because of free rider problem. What are free riders? Free riders are individuals who benefit without paying. So in the case of education, for instance, just now the example of healthcare, right? So in the case of education, okay, when people go and get their education from institutions, from the local institutions, they get smarter. They provide, they contribute to the economy. They come up with new ideas. They innovate. They make the quality of living higher. So who enjoys that? The benefits of education? Not just the people who went and obtained the education, but also the larger population, right? So the people who didn't get the education but enjoy the benefits from the level of education in the country are free riders. They benefit in terms of the higher quality of life caused by the more educated population, more populated members of the population who contribute to the country, but they don't pay for the education. They don't even go for the education. So these are free riders. Just an example. So examples of public goods are sanitation infrastructure, flood defense, ini flood barrier, tidal barrage. Tidal barrage is penampan ombak. Tidal, when there's a coastal line, okay, when you want to break the waves, you sometimes have tidal barrage. Then crime control for a community, okay, policing, reduce risk of disease from vaccinations. Okay, some people, okay, most of the general population get their vaccinations, but there are some anti-vax, kan? Sekarang anti-vax tu, but these anti-vax they enjoy from the from the fact that the people who got the vaccination brought upon them, because there is the fact, there is the what they call the chain of the infection has been largely contained by the people who got the vaccination. So the the people who didn't get the vaccination will not be infected, because there's a sort of insulation brought upon by the people who got the vaccinations. A barrier against the disease, freely provided by the people who got their vaccinations. Now, what else? Freely available knowledge, for instance, through online learning. For instance, this video, when I upload onto YouTube, there may be people outside our class who stumble upon the video, may watch the video and may get the knowledge from this lecture, freely available knowledge. But are they students of UM? No, kan? Do they pay fees to UM? No, kan? But education is public goods. You cannot. It's non-excludable just now, kan? Non-excludable, non-reverse, and freely available. Public service broadcasting. So that's another example of public goods. When you have the government media, the mainstream media, not mainstream, government media, public service broadcasting, when they give out their information, okay, everybody can enjoy, not just enjoy, can receive the information from the government. Now, we look at this diagram and we see the difference between equilibrium and optimum levels of public goods, of local public goods. So the optimum of the local public good is the quantity at which the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. Again, MSc, when it intersects with the MSB, okay, that is the optimum level. But is the optimum level the equilibrium level? So we are going to see that in this diagram. So the interaction between MSC and MSB, okay, this is the x-axis is the quantity of goods, the y-axis is the cost or the price. Okay, we can see here the equilibrium point, the point of intersection between MSC and MSB. Okay, so this is the optimum level. But is this the equilibrium level? Not really. No, we will see later on. This is the efficient optimum versus equilibrium public good. So this is the optimum level. Okay. The next one will show you the equilibrium. Okay. Now, imagine a society with 3 levels of income. The low MBL, the marginal benefit received by the low income people, marginal benefit received by the medium income people or median income people, and the marginal benefit received or enjoyed by the high income people. So again, on the x-axis we have the quantity, and the y-axis we have the price. Okay, so MBs again, when we consider for the whole of the population, we add up all these 3 lines the marginal benefit curves. Okay, so MBL plus MBM plus MBH will result in MSB, the marginal social benefit for the whole population. Okay, so imagine this is the MSC, marginal social cost. Okay, so this point of interaction, okay, between MSB and MSC is the optimum level of provision, as we saw in the previous slide. Okay, so at the optimum level, okay, of the interaction between MSB and MSC, we see the quantity Q1 being desired, being desirable to be provided by the government to the population. But this is the price. This is the price. So at the level of MSB and MS equals MSC at point O, optimum quantity of public goods is Q1 at price of P1. Okay, done. I have explained that. Now the next one for equilibrium quantity. What is the equilibrium quantity? Equilibrium tu yang dah apa nama tu, the optimum is optimal. Equilibrium is the stable. It's the stable. So for equilibrium quantity, it is the preferred quantity of the majority rule. So that is the principle there. Equilibrium quantity represents the preferred quantity of the majority rule. Say the government imposes a head tax for the provision of the public good. Okay, tax normally to include the cost of the negative externality. So this is the level of the tax to take into account of the fact that there are externalities, negative externalities in the community or in the population. Okay, T1 tax is incurred. Now, the equilibrium quantity is the preferred quantity of the median voter at the point M. So instead of looking at the whole population, the MSB, we look at the MBM. MBM, because this is the preferred quantity of the median voter. We equate, in this case, we say that the median voter represents the majority because they are at the middle line. So the median voter, and of the middle income, MBM, okay, when interacts with the tax level, okay, this is the preferred quantity of the public good in question. So this is the level of the optimum. Sorry, this is the point of the optimum level, which gives rise to Q1 as the optimum quantity of the public good to be provided. However, when tax is introduced, okay, the interaction is now being determined by the T1, by the tax level. Okay, interaction between the tax level with the marginal benefit of the median voter, okay, which and gives rise to the endpoint with a quantity lower than the quantity provided, quantity of provision, which is lower than the quantity provision under optimum level. Okay, so equilibrium level is lower. The stable amount of public goods to be provided is lower than what is optimum. Oops, sorry. So the second area of resource allocation is natural monopoly. Okay, whereby what is the definition, or how do you define natural monopoly? Okay, certain goods and services require high fixed costs, or startup costs of operating the business. So meaning the initial capital outlay is very, very, very high. Okay, certain goods and services require high fixed costs or startup costs of operating the business. The initial capital punya outlay tu. And these will give rise to natural monopolies because it does not, the nature of the business, which requires high capital expenditure at the beginning, it prevents many firms from coming into the industry because of the fact that the initial cost is so high. Examples are water systems, electricity, and storage systems. These services involve a large network of pipes or cables. In the case of water systems and storage systems, they involve pipes. But for electricity, they involve cables. And a treatment plant, so in the case of water system and storage, maybe treatment plants. For electricity, involves generator station. So the indivisible outputs are large and expensive. The plants are so massive, so costly. Okay, and they require the expenditure initially at the beginning of the provision. In other words, natural monopoly is an industry in which economies of scale are so important so that only one firm can survive. So it means that the initial cost is so high, but as the provision increases, as the number of output increases, the average cost will fall down. But in order for the firm to survive, the provider to survive, they need to be strong. They need to be financially sound to absorb the initial losses, to the initial high costs, okay, before they reach a certain profitability level, or at least returns, positive returns. Eventually, the increased output will result in lower average costs as the cost of these indivisible inputs is spread over larger quantities. And like I said before, if you can imagine the diagram of economies of scale, as the quantity increases, okay, the cost will go down. Okay? However, to reach that socially efficient quantity, a deficit, that, like I said just now, the initial cost is so high that there is a gap between the cost and also the returns from the product. So the firm needs to be financially sound to be able to absorb the deficit, to pay for the deficit, okay, between the price paid and the average cost. So examples of the three natural monopolies that I mentioned just now. So you can see here for water treatment systems, okay. We begin with the reservoir and then a network of pipes that brings the water from the reservoir to the aerator, coagulant. You add coagulant to combine to buangkan to get rid of the the particles, the big particles in the water. So they combine together, coagulant, and then go to flocculation tank, all these plants and all these processing plants and pipes, filter and then filter again, and then only will be distributed. So you can see here the amount of piping needed, or the amount of capital outlay, the initial capital outlay needed for water treatment systems. Okay, next is an example of a typical electrical supply system. We can see from generation until distribution to customers. How from the initial generation, okay, at the power plants, at maybe the nuclear power plant, or using coal, or whatever else, the source of energy. Then will be electricity will be generated, and then will be stored in the substation, not processed, stored apa nama tu, ada modulation punya activities there at the substation, and then will be transmitted, okay, via the cables to other substations, and then through power lines will be distributed to end users, to consumers, comprising residential consumers, industrial, and also commercial consumers distribution. Another example is the storage system. Okay, storage, we can see from the this comes from the user, from us, from the consumers first, from the consumers of the water lah. So from the water just now, what happens? The wastewater will be flushed down, through whatever our sink will flow from our sinks, will be flushed from our toilets, will flow from our bathrooms to this storage system. Okay, same with industrial wastewater, will go through their storage pipes, okay, and will be passed through a combined sewer, and then will go through this treatment plant or treatment facility, wastewater treatment facility, either then at the end of the day will be released to the body of water, to the natural body of water, either river, the sea, things like that. Okay, so another way is just to release the combined sewer outflow to the water body. So you can see that these three industries or these three systems make the perfect candidate for natural monopoly, because of the fact that they require these expenditures on the pipes, on the cables, in this case on the cables, on the treatment plants, on the substations, power plant, and things like that. Okay, so the government has several options in responding to the deficit problem. Just now when we mentioned there's a deficit between the price paid and also the cost incurred in the beginning, because you see the cost starts very high, and then gradually over time only the average cost will decrease, right? So how does the government address the deficit? The government has several options. First one is to produce the good or service itself and cover the deficit with tax revenue. That's what they do sometimes, kan? The government provides the water, but then at the same time covers the cost of providing the water at a low cost, okay, by taxing in other areas, taxing the companies the incomes from their business activities, from us, our income tax, and so on. Subsidize a private firm to produce while covering the deficit with tax revenue, not directly providing the good or services, but subsidizing a firm, giving the option for a firm to come in and provide the good, under natural monopoly, and they cover the deficit with tax revenue. Finally, this is very dangerous. Allow the private firm that produces the good or service to charge higher price, which is not done, because we say that public goods have positive externalities, and sometimes they are essential goods. In the case of water just now, right? Water is essential for our daily activities, for our life, for manufacturing activities. So if you charge higher price for water, that will affect our lives, will affect our basic income. It will also affect the firms, because they will have to pay a higher cost for their water. That will significantly reduce their profits. So it will affect the economy as a whole. Okay? because consumption will have to be reduced kan, due to the fact that we have lower disposable income, the firms have lower profits. So like I said, this is quite a dangerous move to allow for the public goods to be charged at a higher price. Now, externalities. The third one, the third area in which the government influences in terms of resource allocation. Okay, externalities. Externalities cost inefficiency, and we have learned this before. I will not repeat that. Go back to your lecture notes on this. Why externalities cause inefficiency? The government has a role to internalize externalities. In other words, internalize external costs and benefits to ensure that those who create the externalities include them when making decisions. So all the extra costs, external costs, not extra, external costs to the private transaction needs to be considered, needs to be pulled in. All the benefits need to factor in as well. Now, how for externality, for negative externality, how can the negative externality be internalized? For positive externality, how can the positive externality be internalized? For negative externality, it can be internalized by imposing tax. Okay? For instance, driving that can cause emission, which contributes to pollution, okay? Which contributes to ill health, which contributes to respiratory diseases and things like that. Okay? So how tax in the sense that for congestion, tax on peak period. Okay? Singapore does this. Singapore has this way to charge congestion tax for the cars coming into the city during peak hours. Bagus, so that's very good. And that's just an example. Okay, in some other cities they also have this congestion tax, but the one that is so effective is Singapore. Pollution, whereby emittance tax. Emittance means the what do you call that? It's not pengeluaran. Emittance is the tax that the government charge on any pollutants lah, and on any emissions, on any pelepasan gas, on any emissions. Then positive externality. How does the government internalize it? Through subsidies. For instance, for education vouchers, tax exemptions, and that's why for in Malaysia, okay, for instance, you have things like the book vouchers, for instance, book vouchers for people who pursue their higher education. They may they may ask for tax deductions on their study fees, for instance. So tax exemptions on their fees. Okay. Now we come to the legal concept of land, which I said just now is tied to the first two, the public goods concept and also the government intervention. Land consists of a bundle of intangible rights associated with its ownership and also use. So the ownership of land, okay, and you can describe it as a bundle of rights. Not just that, the use also can be described as a bundle of uses. So on a parcel of land, you may have many ownership rights, and you may also have several use rights. So ownership is one thing. Ownership is when you have a proprietary rights over something. That is ownership, meaning that legally you are the owner of the land, kan? But use, maybe you are not the owner, but you have the right to use the land. Okay. So the bundle of intangible, which is the quantity or duration. So these are some of the bundle of rights, bundle of intangible rights, the bundle of legal rights just now that we were talking about. quantity or duration of the estate. So the estate is the pegangan, the estate is the tenure, the holding on the land. Okay, the quantity meaning okay, a parcel of land or a piece of land, okay, may have one owner. It may have two owners. It may have several owners, several hundreds, even in Malaysia or even in many countries. So it depends on the what do you call, on the we call it, on the, I think on the age, is it age of the tenure? An earlier alienated land. A land has to be alienated to the proprietor. Alienated means diberi milik, given, must be must be given title to a person. So an earlier title, an earlier title given to the original owner may then be passed down to his descendants, son, maybe to the next of kin is the children. Next of kin maybe the children. Okay, so maybe a person, the original owner has 4 children. The 4 children may have, the first one may have 10, the second one may have 10, the third one may have 10 children, the fourth one may have 10 children. So the 1/4 right on the original land, from the original title, may now then be divided to the 10 children of the first child, and so on and so forth. So that is the quantity of the estate, the bilangan, to the share. So the share on the property, on the land. Duration of the estate. So an estate, duration of the estate meaning the holding, the holding tenure, the tenure of the holding, the term of the holding. It may be freehold, it may be leasehold. Okay? If it's a leasehold, say normally in Malaysia it's 99 years. The original term alienated on the land. So 99 years. 99 years will start to run. Start to run. It will the term will reduce until it reaches its expiry date. So from the 99 years, it will go down to 98, 97, 96, and so on until maybe it reaches now. Maybe it was alienated 90 years ago. So there will be 9 years remaining today, if it's a 99-year lease. So that is the duration of the estate. Okay, so in for instance in PJ, Petaling Jaya, near UM, we have houses or residential properties. Okay, the land on which was alienated at 30-year lease. So some of the leases have run out. Yes, run out. So that's the duration of the estate. So what happens when the lease expires? At the expiry of the lease or before that, you can apply for an extension or a renewal of the lease. In effect, the lease can be renewed indefinitely until the government feels that, okay, we need the land, we won't give approval to the extension or the renewal of the lease. The quality of the estate, what is that? The quality of the estate. Quality of the estate meaning the quality of the estate. It can be a full owner or it can be a tenant. A full owner's rights is are more or are stronger than a tenant, in the sense that an owner may be able to sell, also an owner has the absolute right in the property. So he or she, okay, has the authority to deal on the land. Deal means to sell ataupun lease ataupun what else? Sell, lease, and do other dealings on the land. Whereas a tenant's right may be limited by his term on the land. The time of enjoyment, the number of owners, and incorporeal rights. Incorporeal rights, okay, may refer to things like native customary rights. Maybe some of the, this is very normal, okay, for large tracts of agricultural land or estate lands. In Malaysia, in Indonesia, in New Zealand, in Australia, for these large agricultural lands, okay, 10,000 acres, 10,000 hectares, or whatever, very large tracts of land, very large sized lands, okay, to have what they call native customary rights, whereby the courts, the Commonwealth courts have accepted or have acknowledged that the natives may claim rights to the land due to the fact that they may have used the land as a grazing field for their cattle, for instance, or burial grounds for their deads, or maybe places where they find their medicines, the traditional medicines from the land. So many things that, so many activities that the natives can do on the land because of their close relationship with nature again. So these natives may claim native customary rights on the land. Rights, not ownership, different things. So ownership may be proven by title, by a piece of title, because we follow the system whereby our ownership in the land is reflected by a piece of paper, which is the title on the land. So without a piece of paper, without the geran tanah, without the title, okay, a person cannot claim cannot claim that he has the ownership rights on the land. Rights may be ownership, very quite hard to prove. The rights are not absolute, meaning that why do I say this? Why does the slide say this? The rights are not absolute. This is because, okay, there are limitations to the rights of the owners on the land. Okay, ownership and the rights of ownership and use on the land. One, okay, the government the government may have regulations to regulate, to control the land use. Two, the government may also have what is known as acquisition, compulsory acquisition. They may take the land, take the land, okay, through a mechanism known as acquisition or compulsory acquisition. Through a legal mechanism, they take away the land and then they pay compensation to the owner. So, and the owner cannot object to the acquisition. Pengambilan tanah tu tak boleh dibantah. It's just normally the items that can be objected are the area of the acquired land, maybe, to the amount of compensation yang boleh dibantah lah. Okay, so that means that the government still has power over the private land ownership in the world, not just in Malaysia but in other countries as well. Okay, so limitations are these are I've just discussed just now, right? So it's in the next slide. Okay. Land use restrictions, for instance, prohibition to use other than the titles land use. Okay, so in the case of Malaysia, we have 3 types of land use in the title or acknowledged in the land title. We have the 1, agricultural use. 2, we have the building use. So building can comprise residential, commercial, institutional, and a few more. Okay. Religious use pun dikira bangunan keagamaan, bangunan agama, dia punya category of land use. Anyway, the third one is the industrial use. Same, other countries also have this kind of land use restrictions, whereby the owner can only use the land as per the title, as per stated in the title. So if the owner is using the land for a category of use which is not stated in the title, that means that the land use regulation has been breached. Sudah dilanggar, sudah berlaku kesalahan. There's an offence there. Sudah berlaku breach. Now, rights of other owners, if shared, and non-owners, for instance, rights of other owners, meaning limitations just now, if you are a co-owner, co-proprietor, meaning the land has more than one owner, so you are sharing with another person. You, yourself, another person, your share is 1/2, half share. Another person owns half share in the land. So in the title, okay, you will see two names, your name and the other person. Half share, half share. That's fine, that can be done. Okay, if you want to share, if you want to sell your share, you need to have permission from the other person, from the other co-owner. So that is the law. So meaning that you cannot simply sell, lease your land without the permission from the other person. Non-owners, okay, rights of the non-owners, for instance, tenants. Okay, tenants have some rights as well. Okay, some rights as well. Okay, native customary rights, whereby the natives also have some rights as well. They may object. They may ask for compensation if you take their land. If you destroy maybe their grazing area and the cattle grazing area, they may ask for compensation from you. Okay, they have rights. Then any other related laws. For instance, in Malaysia, we have the Malay Reserve Enactments, we have the Heritage Act. So all these acts, Street and Drainage Building Act. So in many countries, they have their own building codes. So the building codes may restrict what can be done on the land, because the building is attached with the land, and normally the definition of land is anything attached to the land. So it can be a building as well. So meaning that the building cannot simply be demolished, cannot simply be renovated, cannot simply be be extended, be renovated, extended, and other things. Okay, and we are focusing on this one, sorry. So we are focusing on land use restrictions, that is the prohibition to use other than the title's land use. And this is the, the idea or the principle that we are going to bring into your second year for your National Land Code, National Land Code under Land Law 2001. Now, land use regulation is any act, ordinance, enactments, codes. So regulation is the umbrella, is the big umbrella. Okay, under the umbrella you have acta, acts, ordinance, enactments, codes, including requirements for approvals or permits to ensure private use of land is aligned with policy standards. So how does the government control or regulate the land use? When you, for instance, when you want to change the use, you want to convert the land use into another type, from residential to commercial, you will need to have approval from the state authority, for instance, actually local planning authority. Sorry, for land is the state approval. Okay, pihak berkuasa negeri. Permits to ensure private use of land is aligned with the policy standards. When you make the application to the local authority or the local planning authority to change the use of your land, they may be able to consider what will be the effect of the conversion to the neighborhood, to the area, based on, in the case of the planning system in Malaysia, they will check against the development plans, what do you call it, development plans. So at the local level, they have the local plans, or they have maybe the special area plans, or maybe they have, besides that, they have the heritage plans. So they have the SAP, they have the local plans. At the state level, they have the structure plan. So they may, bigger projects may require the planners to look at the structure plan rather than just look at the local plan. So by considering the effects of the land use conversion, they can regulate, they can control the private use of land. They can ensure the private use of land is aligned, dia sama align with the policy standards, apa yang the same page with what the wider policy is envisioning for the area. The government or the city or the region, the government can use land use regulation to control market actions and transactions, ensuring some consideration of externalities and the public interest. So the government, another way another usage of the land use regulation is to control the market in terms of their actions and also their transactions, maybe to give conditions on the transaction, for instance, to mitigate the externalities from the transaction. Dia bagi condition, bolehlah kata contoh, for instance, the government when they want to when they are considering to allow for a factory to be set up, they may impose conditions for certain environmental practices to be implemented in that factory in order to ensure that the level of pollution can be brought down, can be the effect of the emissions can be minimized against the environment, for instance. So they may put some conditions together with their approval, because this in this way, one, they can allow the economic activity to occur, which is the factory just now, the manufacturing industry, the manufacturing activity to occur. So that will promote economic growth of the local area. But at the same time, the government can also minimize the impact on the environment, can minimize the impact of the externality, can internalize the negative externality just now. Among land use regulation are development control or management. Okay, these development control and management you will learn in your for real estate students. You will learn this in your, I think, in your planning with Dr. Zafira, 1005, isn't it? And further later on, third year, 3006 property development. Okay. Building regulations, among other regulations, building regulations, when you want to develop the land. Develop means to include, which includes, apa nama tu, developing, which includes works on the building. Having works on the building, for instance, like I said just now, renovations, extensions, demolitions, rebuilding, other things. So building regulations, okay, can be part of land use because of the fact that building is considered part of the land. Restrictive covenants attached to sales of public sector land. So in covenants meaning, for instance, easements adalah hak lalu lalang. You have a right, not just hak lalu lalang, it's a right to use another land. Okay, it's the right to use another land for your benefit. Okay. There must be two parcels of land, your land and another land. Your land is the dominant land, the other land is the servient land. Servient, servant, dominant, boss. So you as the boss, you as the dominant land, you have some rights over the servient land. So the right will run with the land, meaning that if you sell the land to another person, then maybe the right of way just now will continue with the new owner. Policy environment. So the operation of the government policies depends on the organizational arrangement of the policies. Who who administers the policies? Who monitors? Who implements the policies? Who polices? Siapa yang memantau? Who monitors? Siapa yang buat pemantauan? Is it one tier? Is it a two-tier implementation or implementing agencies at the state level, and then you have at the local level, or is it just one level from the federal agencies? So the organizational arrangements of the policies. Under which ministry? Is it under one ministry or under two ministries? Okay. So that is the organizational arrangements of the policies. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Who's running it? Who's monitoring it? Okay, who's doing the enforcement, for instance? The social interactions between actors. So in some cases, there are power plays at work. This is especially true if one actor has lesser power than the other actor. Actor meaning ni lah, the agencies. As a good example will be agencies, two government agencies. Two government agencies who have the responsibility to administer the policy, but one agency may have stronger power than the other agency. So what does this mean to their dynamic, to their relationship? Okay, so who will dominate? Siapa akan dominate kan dalam in that particular implementation of the policy? Of course, the one with the stronger power. Okay. Social interactions between the actors. And then finally, the interactions of those policies with other policies. Sometimes, okay, land use policy may be rolled out, may be implemented, but at the same time, there may be another policy which is stronger. For instance, economic policy. So in Malaysia, before we had the NEP, National Economic Policy, and after that we had the 2050. We have many long-term policies, right? National policies. So some of the national policies, okay, may not gel or may be conflicted with the land use policy. Okay, land use policy. So when that happens, when there are conflicts, okay, there will be winners, there will be losers. Okay, so it depends on the it depends on the situation as well. Okay, for instance, in a situation whereby there's an economic downturn, there's a decline in the economic activities. Okay, the government will place more focus on this, on the economic policies rather than the land use, for instance. So maybe any land use policies will have to follow the direction of the economic policy. So maybe to attain a certain number of employment in that area. So the land use will have to allow for manufacturing, for instance, for employment generating activities, for instance, at the cost of other policies. So the effects of policy are not uniform from country to country and even within the countries, because we have different levels of economic, you have different levels of structures between countries. Among countries, you have different economic speed, we call it speed. The developing economies, we have developed economies, and I'm not just referring to countries, but within the country, okay, you have a region which is more economically developed than the other region, right? So the effect of policy will not be the same throughout the country and among nations. Okay. So conclusion, what's that? Despite the government's role in correcting market failure, the above strategies can give rise to the following government failures. Okay, the government's role is in correcting the market failures, but at the end of the day, the government's action may give rise to government failures. The first one is setting the wrong level of taxation. Okay? The tax needs to reflect the private cost exactly equates with the social cost. So that is very tricky to do. What is the level? If the level of taxation is too high, it may affect the economic performance of the country or of the local economy or of the region. Okay. Second one, consumer welfare effects for product or service with inelastic demand. Okay, demand that is not sensitive to changes in price. Producers may pass on the tax to the consumers and result in the widening of inequalities in the distribution of income. Can you give me an example of a product or a service with inelastic demand, which is however high the price, however high the price, you still need to use it, the service or the product. What is it? Whereby if the consumer is not sensitive to the changes in price, higher price, they still have to pay, or they still pay to get the product, to get the service. The producer can simply charge them the higher, pass on the burden of the tax to them, charge them a higher price. What will happen to the consumers? Increase inequality. Okay? Inequalities in the distribution of income, whereby by passing the tax burden onto the consumers, the producers will enjoy a same level of profit or even higher, because the consumers are not sensitive to the increase in price. They still pay to get the product or to enjoy the services. Finally, employment and investment consequences. Where investors have high mobility, the imposition of taxes in one city will just cause the producers to shift to areas with lower tax. Besides not reducing the externalities, this will create problems such as unemployment in the original city. Isn't that what we see, okay, in some parts of the world? Okay, employment and investment consequences. If one country starts to impose tax on a, for instance, on a manufacturer, what will happen to the manufacturer? The manufacturer will try to find another location which has no such tax in their in their country or in their region, and thus will ensure that they receive the same level of profit. So this will be further facilitated by the fact that, facilitated if the manufacturer has mobility, they're able to move, to shift from the original city with the tax to another city with no or lower tax. Okay. Example, give me examples. Whereby a whole city, the whole city has been brought down by this, by the fact that the government, it could be a local government, could be the state government, could be the federal government that impose tax on that particular activity or that particular area, which causes the manufacturer to shift to another location, to shift to another city, and the effect to the local economy is devastating. Okay, I challenge you to find this because we have many examples in real life of cities, okay, that that have suffered, that have gone into decline because of the fact that their industry, the main industry, has shifted somewhere else, leaving the city with high unemployment rates, because maybe the workers or the employees are not able to follow the manufacturer to the other country, the other region. Maybe they have already bought their houses there. They have a mortgage to pay. They cannot simply sell up and uproot to another country, to another region. The family has been there all this while. Okay? So give me an example of this. I'm very sure if you Google, okay, tax saja automobile industry, hint, okay, you will find examples in the US especially of cities going into a decline. Not city, yeah, cities going into a decline due to this effect, the introduction of taxes in one city. Okay, so remember I told you before in slide number 3, okay, whereby Musgrave and Musgrave, okay, said there are 3 ways, or there are 3 roles of the government in resource allocation, which is decision making, direct provision and indirect provision or prohibition of certain activities. So in decision making, this is some examples. In Malaysia, we have development plans and also housing policy. So these are the decisions made by the government through development plans, through our housing policy development plans. Okay, if you remember what you learned in your planning, okay, you have the local plan, SAP, you have the structure plan, you have the natural physical plan, NFP. So that is in Malaysian development plan. So in other countries as well, in some countries they call their development plans master plan. Okay, but it's the same thing. Those are the documents, or those are the official reports that planners prepare to plan for their cities, okay, development plans, or their states, or their regions, or their country. So housing policy in Malaysia, since 2011, we had our first housing policy at a national level. Okay? National Housing Policy 2011, the first one. National Housing Policy 2011. Okay, so that particular National Housing Policy has now a successor. And the second one is the National Housing Policy 2018, 2018 until 2025, if I'm not mistaken. So we are now at our second National Housing Policy in Malaysia. So in the National Housing Policy document, it sets out, okay, the government's ideas or the government's aspirations of housing for Malaysia. Decision making. Direct provision. So direct provision in the case of Malaysia, the examples are most of the examples I give you are related to real estate. So in this case, related to housing. So we have Prima, Rumah Selangorku, Rumah Iskandar, Rumah WIP, Rumah Transit. So all these are housing programs, housing programs by the government to produce housing for the population. Direct provision. So the third one is indirect provision or prohibition. So we have here income tax taxable and deductible items. This will affect the investors in terms of rental income. So in income tax taxable and deductible items, okay, it will affect the real estate market as well, because it affects the income of the investors. RPGT, the real property gains tax. Okay. So this falls under prohibition rather than indirect provision. RPGT is a way for the government to slow down the speculative activities in the real estate market, especially the residential market. By imposing the RPGT, okay, the speculators will be deterred from flipping, from selling off their properties at a profit, and therefore will further fuel the inflation in our residential market. Okay, so that's the role of real property gains tax. And finally, stamp duty as well. So stamp duty is what you pay, okay, in a transaction. Transaction meaning in terms of real estate is the sale and purchase of a property. So you have to pay stamp duty on the price of the transaction or the value of the transaction, whichever is higher. So that is a source of government income, stamp duty. RPGT also is a source of government income. Income tax is also a source of government income. So that's how the government can influence the volume of transaction, the rate of transaction of real estate in Malaysia, particularly housing. So that's all for today. Okay, I hope that you are clear on the principles, on the concepts that we discussed in this lecture. Do visit the lecture, the slides again. Make sure that you understand. With that, I thank you for your attention. Happy studying. Bye-bye.